Edwin used to give out the tickets. That's how he got elected.
Notes of the other candidates. We'll go ahead and get started. Quite the crowd tonight. Thanks for attending tonight's member information meeting. This is actually being broadcast live as well as recorded. So for those that could not attend today, that are inquiring about any questions about the Constitution or bylaws, we will play that recording on the newsfeed. There will be a hyperlink to that, and it'll take you to a YouTube video for any of our membership to see. There's going to be 3 topics for us to talk about today. 2 of the topics involve the amendment of our Constitution and bylaws. Ellen Underhill will be presenting that piece. After the presentation, Sue Griffin, Nominations Chair, she will facilitate the Board of Directors candidates forum. Okay, so with that being said, I'll turn it over to Ellen Underhill, Board Director and Chair of Governance. Okay.
Hello, fellow club members. First of all, I just wanted to start off saying thank you to the members on the governance committee who have helped out tremendously over the past couple of years. We did a rules revision, and thank you to Sam Ho, Eve Monroe, and Lindsay Stevenson. That was a really big project. So thanks for getting that through. And then thank you to our present governance committee. Committee members are Eve Monroe, Dan DeBeyer, Sean Ireland, Cheatham Parker, and Sue Demchuk. And they've all been very helpful in working toward the amendments to both the Constitution and to the bylaws. So why don't we start first with the easiest issue, and that's the amending of the Constitution. So in 2017, when the bylaws were revised, the purposes of the club were not revised, and I think really because they kind of ran out of time. They had a lot of things that they were working on, and that didn't get done. So we took that on in our committee, and we reviewed the Constitution and found that it's a bit outdated and it needed to be updated. So, for example, there were some references to badminton and lawn tennis in our Constitution, and when we made those revisions, if we go to the next slide, you can see this is what we've proposed. We've taken out some of the references to dancing, and badminton, and lawn tennis, but we've still left it broad enough to item number 2, promote the games of tennis, squash, and other athletic endeavors, including swimming, for example, working out, those kind of things. So that's the proposed wording. I'm not going to read it to you because you can see it and read it yourselves. And if we move to the next slide, so in order to make the changes to the Constitution, we need to have it approved by special resolution. That means 2/3 of the members have to vote in favor, and you'll be able to vote online, or you can vote in person by putting in your ballot at the club reception, or also if you come on November 28th, when we have the annual general meeting, you'll be able to cast your ballot or have a proxy cast your ballot. So that's the Constitution. Anyone has any questions about that? I think it's fairly straightforward. Okay, moving on then to the bylaws. So just a bit of background. The Jericho Tennis Club is governed by the BC Societies Act. That act was overhauled in 2016, and those legislative changes came into effect in November of 2016. As a result of that overhaul, the club transitioned under the new act, and the governance committee recommended adoption of a new JTC set of bylaws, which I'm going to refer to as the new bylaws. And those were adopted at the annual general meeting of the club in November of 2017. That act required that there be certain changes made, and one of those was that you had to have the classes of membership and the rights and privileges that were attached to those classes of membership set right out in the bylaws. So the governance committee came up with the brilliant idea of saying that we would have two classes of membership, voting and non-voting members. And that way, things would be really simple because the rights and privileges that would be attached to those classes would be in the bylaws, and it was either you got to vote or you didn't get to vote. Very simple. And so that's how it was set up. The governance committee undertook updating the club rules, and as part of that process, we did sort of a general ongoing review of the club's constating documents, including the bylaws. Most recently, the board of directors accepted our recommendation that the bylaws be amended, and this is what I'm going to take you through. As a result of the governance committee's review, we looked at what the new bylaws were not intended to make any significant changes to the governing structure of the club. Pardon me. When the general membership was asked to vote on them, we were told basically that everything is pretty much as it was in the past. And as a consequence, those bylaws were approved and accepted. But since that time, the governance committee has identified some areas where there have been some unintended changes. For example, there's no express provision that only members who pay the full play membership fee get a right to vote. And so these changes that we're proposing are an attempt to address what some of those unintended consequences are. In addition, the governance committee has identified that the new bylaws do not provide for a number of things that we think ought to be dealt with. For example, how members are transferred from one membership category to another. How fees are established, and that there can be payment plans. The mechanisms by which a junior member ceases to be a member. The authority to the board to impose fines. That membership approval by special resolution is required for changes to types of categories. In addition, the third area that was being identified is that the new bylaws provide for overly broad inspection rights. That is by members of by members of club documents, and that those rights should be restricted with discretion to the board to provide additional inspection rights when warranted. So what are the amendments? The amendments can be divided into three categories. First are changes that are meant to maintain the position under the bylaws. That's the old bylaws prior to the ones that were adopted in 2017. And where it was not intended, there would be substantive changes. The second area, or category, is housekeeping and changes to reflect what the actual practice is here at the club. And the third is member access to records. So I'm going to just take you quickly through those three different areas and give you a little idea of what those amendments are. And if you have any questions, you can let me know. So category A, which is maintaining the position under the old bylaws. So under the proposed bylaws, we will continue to keep the concept of classes, that's voting and non-voting members, but we will also reintroduce the concept of membership categories into the bylaws. And the reason that we're doing this is because there were, it's really for drafting purposes. We need to, for example, so these changes are meant to maintain the position under the old bylaws in areas where it's not intended, the new bylaws, that there would be substantive change. So, for example, juniors ceasing to be members on aging out, and only people who pay the full play membership can be voting members. So these areas were identified, and we realized we need to make changes to the bylaws, and in order to affect those changes, we've had to put the categories back into the bylaws. So it was really for drafting purposes that we just inserted those different categories back into the bylaws. So it doesn't really change anything. It's just for drafting purposes. Changes around membership quotas. The new bylaws made a change with the introduction of membership classes and removal of categories from the bylaws. The categories are being reinserted in bylaws for drafting purposes. The proposed changes will put the situation back to where it was before the new bylaws were adopted. And only paying member categories will have quotas. That's what the situation was under the old bylaws, so we're simply reinstating this under the new bylaws. So it is technically a substantive change, but the requirement to have a quota for social category was not intended when those changes were made to the bylaws in 2017. So housekeeping. And changes to reflect the practice. For example, age eligibility requirements for membership categories are set out in the rules. That's specifically provided now in the bylaws. Rules provide, this bylaws state that the rules will provide how members move from one category to another, because that's not in the new bylaws. The procedure for acceptance of members and what's required on application is sent out more specifically in the bylaws. The bylaws set out that the board can establish entrance fees and fees for transfer between categories of membership. The bylaws that are proposed also provide that the board may implement payment plans and authorizes the board to determine monthly dues and periodic fees. The eligibility to the board references now to you have to be a voting member as opposed to having a voting certificate. And the other part of the housekeeping amendments was authorizing the board to impose fines for the breach of rules. The third area, and that's the with respect to the inspection of records. Our new bylaws, the ones that we have now, provide effectively what are overly broad rights and instructions. So we have restricted that, giving the board discretion to provide greater access if in the board's discretion it's so warranted. In order to change the bylaws, we need to have approved by special resolution. That's 2/3 of the votes cast, and you'll be able to vote online starting Wednesday, November 13th. You can also come down to the club and cast your ballot in person, putting it in the ballot box, or you can come out to the annual general meeting and you can vote or have your proxy vote on your behalf. So that's kind of it in a nutshell. If people have any questions.
Yeah. I have a question, and I'm sure there's a lot of work that's gone into it. But take that last one that you had up there on the board, which is the member access to records.
Right.
Under our existing bylaws, members have fairly widespread access to records.
They do.
So are you what you're saying is that the new bylaws are going to restrict what was already an entitlement of a member?
It does restrict what a member's entitled to. We, the governance committee, looked at, for example, Vancouver Lawn's inspection rights they have in some of the other clubs, and we came to the conclusion that ours was overly broad, that it allowed club members to request all kinds of records, which we felt just wasn't warranted, you know, like invoicing, billing, and there might be a reason why a club member might want to have be able to inspect certain documents, and so we just felt it shouldn't be as of right that they could ask for anything and be entitled to get it. We felt that they should have a certain entitlement that you're granted under the Societies Act, but above and beyond that, we felt that they ought to be required to ask, and then the board could exercise the discretion whether it was warranted or not.
You know, I understand exactly what you're saying, because I know 15 years ago, there was we had members looking for stuff. My only comment is that you're taking a right away from members that they have.
We're certainly limiting.
Or limiting it
Yeah,
and at the discretion of the board.
yes.
So my next question is, what other significant changes are through all of these documents that you're making in the bylaws that you're doing at the discretion of the board and governance committee and things that is restricting a member's right somewhere? And I know it's a broad question, but is there something else? Because if I hadn't have asked that question about the records, it wasn't obvious, right?
But I think I did say, I did say the bylaws restricting the absolute right.
But it's a change
Yeah.
from the existing. What I'm getting
Yes.
at
Yeah.
is, it is a, an adjustment to an existing right that a member has. That's all.
I know the governance committee feels like we are actually providing rights or putting back into place some rights that were taken away under the old bylaws. We feel like we are reinstating the situation that was before. Like, for example, our bylaws don't say right now, under the new bylaws, that changes in member categories can be made without approval by the members, but we put that back in there. So we feel that the changes that we're making are there to protect the members' rights and privileges. You know, Eve, do you have anything you want to add to that?
No, I think that there are some changes, but earlier on, when those changes occurred during the first revision, they weren't flagged to membership. So there was no discussion about some of those changes. So arguably, the membership didn't engage in those changes. And so now we're just putting it back. And if there are some things there that you wanted to change in the future, from on quotas or whatever, you could do it in the future. But the idea would be to flag it to the members, have some discussion about it. This is just putting it back to the situation that it was before the last vote. And these changes weren't discussed with membership at that time. This one that you've identified is the one change that was actually revised in the old bylaws, but this is a discrete change. You identified that, but hopefully we applied to membership, and there's going to be vote.
Yes.
Helen, first of all, thank you for the work that you've done on this, the analysis and the recommendations. It's a major project. I'm really not up on the bylaws in a big way in terms of the details, so I've been asking for clarification. It was my understanding, if a person, and this is a practical situation, if a person had full paying membership and then decided to take out a restricted membership, would they lose their vote?
No,
No. So
No.
next question, if they move to a social membership, would they lose their vote?
no,
No, so as long as they've had,
yes, as long as you
that was
pay
my
the full
understanding.
play, entrance fee at
With the
some point and pay for that certificate, you have it, you don't lose it, so you always remain a voting member of the club.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
I wasn't clear on that,
Yeah.
from what you were saying today. I thought maybe something had changed
No.
in the 2017, but no. Great, thank you.
Forgive my ignorance on this, but are squash members full play members?
No. There's, there, some of them are. Well, oh, yeah, pardon me, that's true. You could be a voting member and be a squash member if you paid the full amount, or you could be a full play member who plays both tennis and squash. But you could also be a squash member who is a subcategory of social, and then you wouldn't be a full play member.
Go ahead.
So what happens sometimes, just to be clear, is people sign on as full pay members, they pay the full fee, they get their voting certificate, and then, because members often join for life, their circumstances change, and so they change their category. So, and they change maybe from full pay to squash or restricted or something, but they still have their voting rights because they bought their voting certificate when they were a full member. Is that?
Yeah, your voting rights can never be taken away.
You can't be taken.
Yeah, so once you pay your fee, your monthly dues.
I guess I don't know the history, so what's the rationale for other people not having a vote?
Well, I guess one of the rationales is that the price you pay to join the club is substantially different. So if you join as a full paying member, you pay a much higher entrance fee than you do as a social member.
Prorated, I guess. If you will.
No, I was also just gonna add to that is that if you're, we will always prioritize rackets, this is a rackets club. So that's why rackets players, like full play rackets players, have a right to affect change and have a vote. Whereas a social member, not that there's meant to be a divide by any means, a social member hasn't joined to be a racket player in a rackets club. So if you join as a full play, you're joining as a rackets member, you do not have to buy a certificate, but you have the ability to. If you join as a social member, you do not have that ability to unless you upgrade because you want to be a rackets player.
Yeah, that's what I started asking. Disclosing, I'm a full play tennis member. But I must admit, I just don't understand
Yeah.
this us and them thing that, I don't know the history. I would have thought it'd be prorated.
And you prorate the votes, right?
Not that hard.
Okay, anybody else, anything? Okay,
Can I just say a big thank you to Ellen and Eve and the rest of the governance committee. I think a ton of work has gone into this over the last couple of years, and it's a little bit of a thankless job sometimes. So it is acknowledged and appreciated.
John stole the words out of my mouth.
Yeah.
Just a little bit of perspective on the number of voting members. We have about 1,650 voting members. And so if you were to equate that to how many full play members we have, it's almost 950 full play members. So, 57% of our total membership have a voting certificate. Okay. With that statistic, I'll introduce Sue Griffin. Nominations chair.
Thanks.
Thanks, Larry. Good evening, everyone. It's been my pleasure over the last number of months to be the nominations chair for the club. And as you know, we have 3 director-at-large positions available, and there are 4 candidates who are running for these 3 positions. And at this time, I would like to ask each of the 4 to come up and have a seat. Mr. Edwin Hall, Ms. Michelle Kitchen, Ms. Eve Monroe, and Mr. Neil Stewart, if you would like to come up here. Take a seat.
Want me to slide in?
Yeah.
We have the opportunity to hear from each of the four candidates tonight. And prior to the meeting, Larry and I held a random draw of the four names to determine the order of speakers. And the four candidates have been informed in terms of the order just before the meeting. The format for the next section of the meeting is as follows. I will ask each candidate to speak. They will receive 3 minutes each to present their platforms to the floor. I will have a timer on and I will give a 1 minute remaining signal. I will then give a 30-second signal. And at the 3 minutes, the Oscar goes will start. And I do that. Yeah, I do have a book. And I'm doing that with just a request for respect for each of the candidates. Once each of the candidates has spoken, I will open the floor for questions for a short period of time. You can address your question to each of the individuals or to the candidates at large. To that point, Mr. Edwin Hall.
I think most of you here know me, and for those who don't, I've already been introduced. So my name is Edwin Hull, and I've been a member of the club for almost 40 years, and have been involved with the board and its committees for the past 6. If you want to know more about my history and about the things I've been involved with, it's all on the notice board. I urge all of you who are in doubt about who you're going to vote for to go read all 4 candidate statements. In the meantime, I think it's time to talk about the future, and I think the 2 biggest issues facing the club over the coming years are membership management and the capital plan. We have the vision statement and the strategic plan, but the capital plan, which implements what other things we need to do, we need to build, is a very important issue. On the membership plan, one of the big issues that's faced the club for many, many years is the aging of the club membership. When I joined the club back in 1980, the average age of the club members was about 38, and most of them were full play. Today, the average age of the membership is around 55, and the average age of the full play members is about 60. And one of the reasons for that is that we have 98% of people don't leave, we only have a 2% turnover. So if you look around, 98% of the people you see today will still be here next year, and they'll all be a year older. So the only way we can really stop the age of membership creeping upwards and upwards and upwards is to try and fill in a few more people at the bottom and try and improve the number of juniors and children of members who make the transition to intermediate when they hit 19. The board has worked on that for a couple of years, and we have new changes to that process coming into effect next year, which we hope will address that issue. So the other things affecting membership are dealing with our wait list. We take in 64 people a year, 16 every quarter, which means that the total membership keeps creeping upwards, and we have to sort of identify, well, when does that become a problem? Doesn't seem to be a problem yet, but it may sometime in the future. How do we manage the wait list? How do we manage the intake? That intake is very important because that provides all the money for our capital plan, our capital expenditure. It pays off our debt, it paid for the pool, it paid for the 3rd bubble. And I chair a subcommittee of facilities which is looking at a capital plan for the future and taking a number of proposals that have been suggested by members or by committees and trying to rank them, trying to evaluate them, so we can come back to the membership at some time in the future and say, these are our recommendations, these are what these things will cost, and this is how would you go about it, and ask the membership to rank them and support them and go forward with them. I believe my history and my involvement with things in the past makes me able to make a significant contribution to those decisions, and I welcome your support. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Edwin. Next, I would like to invite Michelle Kitchen.
Thank you. Hi. So my journey that got me here today started with a call out of the blue from Sue, who actually proceeded to tell me that a handful of people had put my name forward as a potential candidate for the board. And we chatted a bit, and she asked me to go away and think about it, at which point I said, absolutely not. I have absolutely no hesitation. I would love to apply to be on the board. Tell me what I need to do. This is a very special place for me. I joined 5 years ago, and it's given me a lot of friendships, a lot of fun times. I took up the sport of tennis, and I'm a complete addict. You'd think I'd be a pro by now. I play every day, sometimes a few times a day. So, you know, this is a chance for me to actually give back to a very special place. I don't have a vision to share with you today. All I can share with you is the notion that we all four of us have a lot of passion for this club, and we share that, but what makes us very different is our background and our experiences. So I'll share 3 things with you. I'm currently a director and a chair of a committee on the board of directors for Dress for Success Vancouver. It's also a nonprofit organization. So I can really appreciate the role of the board and what it's about. And really, it's not about running the organization. In my humble opinion, the board is really about understanding and working with teams and members and staff to guide the organization. Second, what you should know about me is I grew up in a club like this. I grew up at the Toronto Cricket Skating and Curling Club, kind of like the Arbutus. I was a competitive figure skater, not a tennis player. But as such, I really have a lot of heart for the culture of the club and the environment of the club, and I really respect the rules and the policies that guide the club, and the importance to really uphold those rules. And lastly, I'm in the business of advertising. I'm just an ad gal, I'm a marketer. But what that says to you is I spent my life actually stewarding brands and stewarding brands to be their very best. So the club is our brand. And so, you know, it's not about changing the heart and soul of the brand or the club. It's really about working with people, collaborating, creating new ideas to steward the brand and protect the heart and soul and implement new ideas to address evolving needs. And that's it. So thank you for your consideration of my skills. And I'd be flattered and honored to represent the member base and be at the table with these fine folks that are already on board. Cheers.
Thanks, Michelle.
You'll start.
Thank you. There are 2 main reasons that I'm running for the board again. The first one has to do with archives. Several years before I retired, I was on the Vancouver School Board Archives Committee, and it taught me how complicated that was. It's not an easy solution. And so when I got involved in the board here, I realized we had some missing pieces of information, and we didn't really have a system for archives. And this was more complicated than a novice like myself could take on. And so what I really been looking for is to have someone hired who is a professional in this area. We're relatively small, and it should be fairly straightforward compared to something like the size of the Vancouver School Board. So that was something that I initiated. I took a year off from the board, and I would just like to come back and take that one on. The second one is planning. That has always been a passion of mine. The board gave me an Outstanding Builder Award. I'm not looking for another award, but what I am looking for is what I would call a global plan. And we have a few unfinished projects. I started the planning committee 2 years ago. I haven't been on that committee for a year. I had a rest, and I'm ready to come back and contribute and just see where we can get to with that. Because what I'm looking for, we used to call it a master plan, where you took all of the pieces and you came up with a strategy and the financing for it. And I think that's the way we should go. We still have a few loose ends, and I would not want to see us go one project at a time that we, as we have in the past. The way we went about this club, we took a long time, and we had a lot of people involved, and it's about communications, building consensus, and then coming up with one final plan that everyone can get behind. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks. Thanks, Neil.
Eve Monroe.
Well, thank you everyone for coming out tonight. Expected a slightly larger group. And I was going to introduce myself for those who don't know me. I'm not sure how large a group that is, but my name is Eve Monroe. I've been a member of the club for 23 years as a full-time member. My professional background is as a lawyer, and I retired a couple of years ago after 34 years in practice. My practice included quite a wide range of corporate commercial work, and I ultimately ended up specializing in intellectual property, information technology, licensing. I do have a prior nonprofit board experience, and I have advised boards. So my path to standing here this evening was really rather unbelievably is that I had an interest in this bylaw issue which was discussed here this evening. And I know many of you may think that's kind of crazy, but that's the truth. So I decided to volunteer for some committees, and really through that committee work I've become to really appreciate just how wonderful the hard work is of the board of directors and the committees to making this place the fantastic place that it is. So we did hear earlier that the work that I've done in committees has been on the governance committee and its rules subcommittee and the the capital planning subcommittee of the facilities committee. And yeah, it's been some pretty dry work, but it had to be done. There was those rules. And the whole idea behind the rules, of course, the rewrite for the rules was to make them more user-friendly, and I hope that's the case. There was also work on the bylaws, which brought me here in the first place, and the Constitution, which we'll be voting on. And anyway, through this work, I feel like I've learned a lot about how the club operates and the work that goes on here. I've enjoyed working with my fellow members, and I feel that I can make a positive contribution in work as a director, and I'd like to have the opportunity to do that and perhaps provide a fresh perspective. I feel I have a skill set that can make a contribution, and I have a willingness to work with the team just to continue so that this club continues to be the positive community and first-class RACS club that it is today. So I do have a few thoughts about governance and things that I think are important. One is, I believe in a member-driven approach, which is consultative. So we've had some surveys, but I think we can probably improve that process and maybe work on some other ways so that members can have a positive way of having their views known and be heard in a constructive way. I also believe in transparency in governance, ongoing communication, letting people know what's going on, and of course that whole sustainable financial management for the future that everyone was talking about, that's incredibly important. All right, that's all I have.
Thank you all. No need for Oscar music. That's great. Thanks very much. We can't for the floor. I would like to entertain any questions from the floor. I don't think you need to come up to the mic. You'd just like to put up your hand, and we're recording this, so if you could say your name as well. Oh, wow. Everybody's clapping. Any questions? Any queries? Well, thank you. It's a great night. Larry, over to you.
Okay. I don't even think I need the mic, but.
Okay.
Thank you everyone for attending the member information meeting and hearing the candidates speak today. The discussion on the bylaws as well as the Constitution. Voting will commence tomorrow, so for those that have emails, there will be an email blast that goes out tomorrow morning. If there's any issues or complications, feel free to message any of our team members, and we'll be more than happy to assist. You can also do in-person ballots. And then the November AGM, November 28th at 6:30. So please attend that. We hope to have some information on the membership survey that should be presented. So please let the rest of the membership know. And outside of that, have a great evening. Thank you very much.
Thanks, everybody.
Well, thank you. Thanks for